So in this section, we're going to talk about classifying breaks, what we name them, and then how those breaks repair. So this is the different ways that you can break a bone. Cool, right? Okay, so some of these are really specific. Cole's fracture is specifically of the radius bone right here in your wrist. It's a fracture of the radius right here by your wrist that pushes the radius upward. That's not one of the ones you have to know for me for this class. What I do want you to know is comminuted, which is where the bone fractures into more than two pieces. And it can be really complicated because you sometimes end up, like with this one, with like pieces of bone. Like if you've heard that someone's bone shattered, most often that's a comminuted fracture. Compound fracture could be open or closed, but it is where the bone breaks so completely that the ends of the bone end up going through tissues. Open is the kind of compound fracture we normally think of where the bone actually goes through the skin. These are very dangerous because they damage tissue around the bone as the bone like passes through. They can be very, very dangerous and take a really long time to heal. They usually have to be held in place with pins or something to keep the two pieces of bone together. Greenstick is an incomplete fracture. So this comes from literally green sticks. If you've ever tried to break a stick and it wasn't completely dry yet, then you tried to break it and part of it broke and part of it stuck together. Okay, and you're like, hey, it won't break. That's a green stick fracture. So it happens in the collarbone, happens in the arm bone sometimes, where the bone has partly broken, but part of it is still connected. Okay, that's a green stick fracture. Oblique fracture, it's diagonal. Hot fractures are at the ankles. Spiral fractures are spirals, where the bone has twisted as it broke, and rather than a clean sideways oblique, the break actually twists around the bone. And then a transverse fracture is any other fracture that's just horizontally across the bone, okay? Actually less common. So the ones I want you to know are comminuted, compound, greenstick, and then oblique, spiral, and transverse. And those should be obvious because they're just exactly what the name says. All right, so this is a comminuted, compound, and oblique fracture. Woo! So you can see this little dark space right there. Yeah, that is where this part of the femur went through the skin. Yeah, gross, huh? And you can see here and here that the break is not even across the bone. So here you can see that the break goes up and then around the back, it goes back farther down. And then this one, it goes down in front and up and back, okay? These are both spirals. I know, gross, right? And then you can also, one other thing you can see here is that this is a young person who's not done growing because you can see the epiphyseal plate is completely separated there. Okay? So this is a former student who I think was 14, 15 when this happened. I think this was a soccer injury. And obviously a very bad injury, and they had to put a post or a pin. They call this a pin. Okay, it's not a pin. It's a really big metal beam in your leg. But it can be adjusted. So that's what this is. They can actually screw it to make it longer. So what they do is they set the break. They put this thing, they do surgery to put this thing in. They take an x-ray, and then they try to straighten out the bones. And then they take another x-ray to make sure they've got them in the right place. And then they drill pins into the bone from this thing to hold all the pieces in place. Cool, right? And that's all inside your leg. It's uncomfortable, but better than walking around with a completely disconnected leg. Gross. Okay, so what does happen when you break your leg? So when you break a leg, the medullary cavity bleeds and creates a hematoma. Hematoma is just a bruise. And that hematoma is going to collect around the bone as well under the periosteum. The white blood cells are going to come in, seal off the blood vessels, and clean up the hematoma, and then create a fibrocartilage, what we call a callus, kind of a solid space. This is going to bulge out because there's the space where the hematoma was that it's basically going to fill in. And also a little extra space gives the cells more room to work. The blood vessels then regenerate through this callus to reattach to each other. And then that whole thing becomes ossified. So on an X-ray, you can see that the bone is healing and how far along it is in healing, whether you have a callus or ossification. And if the ossification goes across the medullary cavity, then you know it's not done healing yet. And then as the osteoclasts continue to work, they're going to, after all of these blood vessels are reestablished, they're going to come through and clean out this callus across the middle of the medullary cavity. But you can still see where the break was because you'll have this thick area around where the bone had broken. And that is how you know the bone is done healing, but there's signs that it had broken in the past. And these stick around for years. So you can, a lot of times in an adult, tell that they say broken arm when they were a kid because you can still see this slightly thicker area. Okay, and that is the end of our bone tissue lectures. Cool, right?